The third quarter ended with a whimper. We're going to talk about what to expect and just how big an impact has the immigration crackdown had on restaurants. Hello and welcome to the Week in Restaurants, a look at the biggest stories of the week in the restaurant industry. I'm Lisa Jennings, Executive Editor of Restaurant Business, and I'm here with Joe Guszkowski, Senior Editor at RB. We'll be talking about the upcoming earnings season, which begins in earnest next week. And then we're going to talk a bit about the immigration issue, which has been a real problem. But Joe, let's start with you. Casual dining had some bright spots earlier this year. So how is the third quarter looking for that segment?
Yeah, my big question for the third quarter is can casual dining keep this comeback going? This has been led by chains like Chili's and Texas Roadhouse, and I don't see them stopping anytime soon. Chili's is lapping a 14% same-store sales increase last year, and I think they'll have no problem beating that because they've just been on fire and they're going to continue to keep rolling, in my opinion. The real question is, can some of these other brands that have shown some signs of life, like BJ's and Applebee's, can they keep doing that for another quarter? You know, they've implemented value, they've done some menu innovation, they've worked on their operations, and that has shown some results. But in a really tough environment like the one that we've been in the past few months, do those things still work? And if they do, can they be replicated by other brands like Red Robin and Outback that haven't been doing as well? And if they can, I think we need to start talking about casual dining as one of the real winners of this environment that has not produced a whole lot of success stories across the restaurant industry. We've talked about the comeback for a couple quarters now, but if they can do it again, it's starting to look like, something is really happening in casual dining as opposed to fast food and fast casual, which of course is your beat. So I'm wondering what you're looking for out of the fast casual segment.
Well, fast casual segment, the third quarter really did seem like it was not going well. In the beginning of the quarter, trends were improving. A lot of brands, at the end of the second quarter were saying how things were kind of looking up. But then it turns out from analyst reports, it looks like there was a downturn in mid-August, and then things really got worse in September. And the areas of weakness are, in particular, of course, the lower income diners. And then Hispanic consumers are apparently an area that several analysts have pointed out because of the immigration crackdown. We're going to talk about that in a minute. People are just generally feeling the need to stay home. They don't want to be out. But also younger consumers. So, we are going to be looking for some of these brands, the big brands that we follow, Chipotle, Cava, Sweetgreen. Some of those have been impacted in DC by the federal government shutdown. That's not so much in the third quarter. That really happened. That's going to show up more in the fourth quarter. But, it's all about trying to get that traffic in. And it's what's interesting, especially in, we're seeing everybody discounting. It's been particularly bad in fast food. But, you're seeing it in casual dining too. And so you do have to wonder, even if they do drive traffic, how much, if everybody's buying off discounts, how much this is really going to be impacting the earnings overall. I don't know whether or not in casual dining, you're expecting that that's going to be an issue.
Yeah, in casual dining, the value meals have really been driving a lot of the traffic, which on one hand is a positive, okay, they've found a formula that brings people in. But yeah, like you're saying, like how sustainable is that when people are just looking for deals and eventually those deals are going to have to go away? I'm really curious to see how this works in fast casual because I think we've talked before about, fast casual doesn't really do discounts. It doesn't do combo meals, but they're starting to lean in that direction, right?
Right. Yeah. In fact, one of the bright spots that I'm hearing some analysts talk about is Shake Shack, which has been doing bundled meals and really kind of behaving a lot more like a quick service brand, even though it is more premium, in terms of what they're offering. But Shake Shack, they've really upped their marketing game this year. And earlier at one of the analyst conferences, the CFO, Katie Fogarty, said that they even before the government shutdown, that Shake Shack was seeing some trouble in DC because of, then it was dealing with the, National Guard coming in and that sort of issue even before the government shutdown. And in New York as well, because of tourism being impacted, by people being just not reluctant to come to the US because of a lot of chaos going on. But outside those two markets, Shake Shack was actually looking pretty good. And she was predicting that there would be increases in same store sales, in cities like Miami, Orlando, Denver, San Francisco, even Houston. These are markets where Shake Shack was actually looking pretty good. So I feel like the efforts put in there are paying off. Chili's, it could come out as the shining star. We're still looking at Chipotle too, which some analysts are expecting will still see trouble. But Chipotle has really put a lot of emphasis on promotion, doing more marketing of things. They had the summer of extras. They had this Grupotle thing, which was really a value play, and is actually a pretty good deal. So it's going to be interesting to see, what they say when it all comes down to the earnings. But I do think broadly, across all segments, consumers are just not spending. Everybody's hurting out there. They're feeling, except for a certain segment, it's a bifurcated economy. We're seeing people who have money, out there spending, but it's a much smaller percentage of the population. And so I think everyone's going to be feeling that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's natural to really push the gas on the marketing like Chipotle has done. One brand I'm interested in, and you wrote about them recently, is Qdoba. And they've launched, I believe, their first nationwide TV campaign, and they're promoting free guac and queso, which is, of course, something that if you go to Chipotle, you always have to pay extra for those things.
Right. That's a real value play for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's always been free at Qdoba, but they, it's something that they really feel captures people's attention. I mean, like Chipotle has these new sauces, for example, that people are loving, but you got to pay for them. It's my focus group of my two children, come home and say, the latest sauce at Chipotle is great, but it's $1. I'm not paying an extra $1 for the sauce. So little things like that, I think, are really making a difference and can convey whether or not, a brand is seen as having a good value fundamentally. And Qdoba is really going for that message right now.
Totally. I like it. I think it's a smart strategy. We shall see. I guess we should quickly mention, you and I don't cover fast food. Jonathan Mays does that. But two of the other brands that will be closely watched are McDonald's and Starbucks, which Starbucks obviously in the midst of this massive turnaround, trying to get traffic back. And McDonald's has done so much to turn their traffic around, and still unclear whether any of it has worked. So
yeah, Starbucks, Jonathan has written about, whether or not the magic fairy dust of Brian Niccol will take hold. It's going to take some time for Starbucks to, and I know we've talked about it, on this podcast quite a bit. So everybody's going to be watching to see what their numbers look like for the third quarter, and for McDonald's as well, especially given the deep discounts that McDonald's is doing, which is kind of set the rest of fast food into a tizzy to try to match that.
Yeah. And yet it hasn't really seemed to work for them. I mean, they haven't bounced back in any significant way. So it'll just be interesting to see. I do wonder, so I think this period will cover the pumpkin spice latte launch at Starbucks, which maybe that'll help their numbers. I think I might go get one tomorrow, actually, because I need that autumnal vibe and flavor in my life. But
now you're ready.
Maybe that'll
you weren't ready in August. Yeah.
No, not in August when it was still 85 degrees here in Wisconsin. But Lisa, you last week published a really good in-depth look at the immigration situation in the country and how it's impacting restaurants. What did you find out?
Well, what I was trying to do was really take a look at this immigration crackdown that's been, in place now since Trump, came into office in January, and how big an impact it's had on the industry. And I've been talking to restaurant operators about this for months, literally trying to get folks to give me an idea of what's happening. We've seen a lot of media reports that talk about how employers are trying to help their workers understand their rights and understand how to set up the restaurants so that they can be protected and that sort of thing. But we haven't really seen much about the actual numbers. And, the Trump administration has put out some numbers that some academics have questioned, but, fundamentally what they're saying is that we feel like in the first 7 months, about 350,000 people have been either detained, deported, or self-deported since January. And we don't know how many of those might have been working in restaurants, but it's probably quite a few because there is such a large percentage of immigrants working in restaurants. Not all of them are illegal. Some of these people have had authorization to work. And even those people are being taken in at least by many accounts. The problem is that a lot of people are trying to find a way to be legal and work legally, but there just isn't a path anymore. The path that had existed seemed to not be in place anymore. There's just a lot of confusion about how employers can react to this and how workers can react to this. And so But it's not about the numbers. What everyone told me was it's about the fear that has been created. So that fear, trickles through to consumers who are not going out, as we just mentioned, and workers are not showing up. They're leaving. There's just so much fear out there in the industry, and that leaves employers kind of stuck because you don't really know how to deal with these kind of absences. And so the story kind of goes through how a lot of people are looking at it. What industry groups would like to see is some sort of work permit program, some sort of Trump had said he was removing criminals, but a lot of the people that are being taken are, have no criminal record. And so these are people who have been working in the community for decades, in some cases, who are deeply rooted and are very valuable to the companies that they work for. So they would like to see some kind of work permit. There are proposals on the Hill that deal with it in various forms, but fundamentally that's what they're hoping will happen. And I know it's a very bad time to be pushing for legislation. The restaurant industry has pushed for immigration reform for decades. They've been trying to get this dealt with, really without any good effect to date. And a lot of people would say this is not the right time to push for immigration reform. But, other people would say it's broken enough that we need to do that now. So I don't know, Joe, have you heard about people talking about this in your conversations with restaurant operators?
I really haven't. And, it's not necessarily my beat, but I do find it surprising that I haven't heard about it more. And it's almost like, restaurants' hiring situation has been a pain for as long as I've covered the industry. And this is only making it harder. But I wonder if these deportations almost have like a chilling effect on restaurants' willingness to even discuss this, because if you go out in the media and you're talking about this, trying to bring attention to it, are you putting your employees at risk in a way? Because you're saying, hey, I have employees who could be targets for ICE. So it's almost like, I wonder if you talk to anyone who was hesitant to speak about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can't tell you how many people would say things off the record or would say things that they didn't want to be identified as saying because they were afraid. And it, there's kind of a two-edged sword here because, speaking out on this issue, having your name published in any way in relation to this issue brings out some pretty, hateful people that will write negative reviews about your restaurant and, personally attack you. And I heard this over and over again. And, on the other hand, though, there were a few accounts of people who, did something like posted a sign saying ICE not welcome here or letting their workers, be paying them even though they were staying home because they were afraid to come out, that getting into the media. And then there was this torrent of support from people who really were trying to help these operators pay their workers and get through this crisis. And so, they're the good angels out there that are helping out people, but there are also, those that really see this as an issue that they need to attack people personally about, which is unfortunate. But yeah, there was a lot of fear in talking about the issue. And I wish I could tell all the stories that I heard, to be honest, but people have asked me not to. So, and I don't want to put anyone in a situation where they might see that kind of unpleasant reaction. So, it's something that we're going to keep covering. And I think the industry is speaking out about it, in at least within the trade groups that are available, the Independent Restaurant Coalition, because this really does impact, I think, independent restaurants more than even chains, as small businesses, is speaking out. And the National Restaurant Association has also spoken out about it to some degree. So hopefully, and the state trade associations in particular also have. So I think the industry is trying to stand together and find a solution. And hopefully that will happen.
Yeah, I hope so. It's just a really thorny situation, and restaurants, of all people, should not be the ones having to solve this problem. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. So coming up, Joe is coming back to tell us a little bit more about technology and tipping after a commercial break.
Keep up with what's happening in the restaurant industry with Restaurant Daily.
I'm NRN Managing Editor Leanne Zinsmeister.
I'm RB Managing Editor Heather Lally.
We bring you a specific look of what's happening in the restaurant world from brands like McDonald's, single unit mom and pop shops, and hot button issues like inflation, tariffs, and more.
Start your day right with the Restaurant Daily podcast every weekday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode.
Hello and welcome to Tech Check, where I, Joe Guszkowski, talk really fast about one big topic in restaurant tech. This week, we need to talk about tipping. And specifically, we need to talk about those digital tip screens. You know, the ones that kind of swivel around and thrust you into a sudden moral dilemma in front of everyone else in the restaurant. I think those digital tip screens have to go. And this is not a personal axe that I have to grind. Some new data from Pop Menu found that 65% of consumers are now fed up with being asked to tip all the time. That's up from 60% last year. Restaurants have been talking a lot recently about how they can improve the customer experience, in part by actually removing some unnecessary technology. And to me, the digital tip screen, it should be the first thing to go. One solution, how about bringing back the tip jar? It's simple, analog, and totally voluntary. For customers who don't have cash, how about putting a QR code on the jar? Okay, so there may be no perfect solution for tipping, but customers are making it clear that something needs to change.
And that should do it for The Week in Restaurants, which is produced by the always effervescent Kim Spoons Kazmarek. Join us next week and tune in wherever you get your podcasts. For Joe Guszkowski, I'm Lisa Jennings, and have a great day.